She broke into my barn at midnight to sabotage my farm, but my 2,000-pound bull was already home. Karen screamed as horns lowered toward her, and the woman who tried to destroy my family finally tasted real fear. I'm Sarah Whitfield, single mother of 2, running the cattle farm my grandfather built in rural Coulter County, Ohio. Last spring, developers redrew county lines, folding my farm into the new Whispering Pines Homeowners Association overnight, without my consent. HOA President Deborah Voss arrived within days, clipboard in hand, calling my barn an eyesore ruining community property values. I explained my family had farmed this land 3 generations before her subdivision existed, but she wasn't listening. Deborah smiled coldly, said covenants applied to everyone now, and livestock had no place in her upscale neighborhood. The first notice arrived taped to my mailbox. Remove all farm animals within 30 days or face daily fines. I called the county clerk, who confirmed my property held a century-old agricultural exemption Deborah's HOA couldn't override. When I showed Deborah the exemption, she laughed and said paperwork could always be lost or reconsidered by the board. That night, someone spray-painted "Filthy Farm" across my mailbox, and Deborah's assistant just happened to post about it online. I installed trail cameras around my property, a decision that would matter far more than I ever imagined. Deborah began mailing fines weekly, $200 each, claiming my barn violated vague aesthetic harmony, bylaws nobody could define. I attended the HOA meeting to appeal, but Deborah cut my microphone off before I'd spoken 30 seconds. Neighbors who'd known my grandfather stayed silent, terrified of becoming Deborah's next target for humiliation and fines. My daughter came home crying after Deborah's kids called our farm trashy and said we'd be evicted soon. I discovered Deborah's brother-in-law owned a development company quietly buying up farmland bordering my property line. Suddenly her obsession with my unsightly barn made unsettling sense. She wanted my land, not community harmony. I requested the HOA's financial records, since dues seemed suspiciously high compared to what actually got maintained. Deborah denied my request, citing board discretion, then quietly changed the association's public records access policy overnight. A sympathetic board member, Frank, warned me privately that Deborah controlled every vote through favors and quiet threats. My mailbox fines climbed past $3,000. And Deborah threatened a lien against my grandfather's farmhouse. I hired a lawyer who confirmed the agricultural exemption still protected me, but litigation would take months I couldn't afford. Deborah escalated further, hiring a surveyor to reassess my property boundaries, hoping to shrink my land on paper. The surveyor accidentally revealed my shared access road was actually part of my original deed, not community property. When I mentioned this discovery to Deborah, her confident smile flickered for the very first time. Days later, she blocked that very road with construction cones, calling it temporary HOA maintenance work with no timeline. My feed truck couldn't reach the barn, forcing me to haul hay by hand through the woods for weeks. Duke, my bull, grew agitated and protective, sensing the tension building around the only home he'd ever known. For 2 quiet weeks, Deborah backed off completely, and I let myself believe the worst had finally passed. I focused on my kids, fixed the fence Duke had bent, and almost forgot about the ongoing feud. Frank called quietly, saying Deborah had gone unusually silent, spending long hours meeting privately with her brother-in-law instead. I should have known that silence from Deborah Voss was never peace, only careful, dangerous preparation. Animal control showed up unannounced, saying an anonymous tip claimed Duke was being neglected and dangerously mistreated. The officer found Duke healthy, well-fed, and calm, apologizing for wasting my afternoon over a clearly false report. I later learned Deborah herself filed that anonymous complaint, using a burner phone traced by Frank's tech-savvy son. Furious, I confronted Deborah directly, demanding she stop harassing my family over her hidden land deal. She denied everything smoothly, then threatened to have Duke declared a public nuisance and forcibly removed by force. That threat terrified me more than any fine. Duke was practically family, not just livestock to sell. I started documenting every interaction, saving texts, recording calls, building a case Deborah didn't know existed yet. Deborah pushed an emergency board vote banning large livestock entirely, timed while I was out of town. The vote passed 6-1, with Frank, the lone dissenter, publicly recorded refusing Deborah's pressure campaign. I received a letter demanding Duke's removal within 72 hours or forced seizure by county contractors. Panicked, I called every lawyer, farmer, and reporter I knew, desperate for anyone willing to intervene quickly. A local journalist, intrigued by HOA overreach stories trending online, agreed to look into Deborah's questionable land dealings. She discovered Deborah's brother-in-law's development permit depended entirely on acquiring my farm's water rights and acreage. Without my land, their entire golf resort project would collapse. Explaining Deborah's relentless, almost desperate campaign against me. Armed with this motive, I finally understood the fines weren't about aesthetics, they were about greed. I refused to remove Duke, daring the county to actually attempt seizing an angry, protective 2,000-pound bull. Deborah, humiliated by my public refusal, decided she'd handle things herself, quietly, under cover of darkness. 3 nights later, my trail camera detected movement near the barn at exactly 2:17 in the morning. I watched, heart pounding, as Deborah crept toward my property line wearing dark clothes and gloves. She carried bolt cutters and a folder, clearly planning to plant something incriminating before an inspection tomorrow. My hands shook recording everything, knowing this footage might finally prove what Deborah truly was. She cut through my fence lock, muttering about finally finishing this, as she stepped onto my land uninvited. I called Frank immediately, whispering for him to come quickly with his phone and a witness. Deborah moved toward the barn door, unaware Duke had wandered close, hidden behind the old grain silo. I stayed silent on the phone, letting the camera keep rolling as she pulled the barn door open. The moment the door creaked, Duke snorted loudly, and Deborah froze in absolute, breathless terror. She spun around, flashlight shaking, directly into 2,000 pounds of very unhappy, protective bull. Duke lowered his head and charged, not to gore her, but to chase the intruder off instantly. Deborah screamed, dropped her folder, and sprinted for the fence with bolt cutters flying behind her. She tripped over the very fence she'd just cut, landing hard in a muddy irrigation ditch. Duke stopped at the property line, snorting triumphantly, as if he understood exactly what he'd accomplished. Frank arrived seconds later, filming Deborah covered in mud, bolt cutters beside her, folder scattered everywhere. Inside that folder were forged inspection reports, fake neglect photos, and notes about the pending land deal. The trail camera had captured everything, the break-in, the tools, and her muttered confession about finishing things. By morning, the journalist had both the footage and the documents, ready to publish everything immediately. The story exploded online. HOA Karen breaks into farm, gets chased by bull, caught red-handed. Emergency board members demanded Deborah's immediate resignation once they saw evidence of forgery and criminal trespassing. Animal Control publicly apologized, confirming the original neglect complaint had been entirely fabricated by Deborah herself. County prosecutors opened an investigation into trespassing, forged documents, and potential fraud tied to the development deal. Deborah's brother-in-law's golf resort project collapsed instantly once investors learned about the unfolding legal scandal. Deborah resigned in disgrace, faced criminal charges, and was permanently banned from any future HOA leadership position. The board unanimously restored my agricultural exemption, publicly apologized, and named Duke an honorary community protector. Now Duke grazes peacefully behind a repaired fence, and neighbors joke he's the best HOA president we've ever had.